Well, it's interesting that you describe China as both the arsonist and the firefighter, because I know the Mexican government is trying to develop closer ties with China, but they must know that China is also propping up the cartels that the Mexican government isn't fond of dealing with.
So it's important what you said there because the current Mexican government, the government of President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador and the Morena political party, is embedded with the Mexican cartels. So Mexico's had a narco state for a long time. This is not new to AMLO and Morena. Since the Guadalajara cartel of the late 1970s to today, there's been elements of narco state that's been developing inside Mexico. They capture elements of the police, the federal service, and things like that. And there's plenty of stories and cases and indictments to show this. However, the difference between a narco state and a criminalized state is big because it's the difference between corruption, like organized crime and cartels corrupting elements of your government and capturing corrupt officials or maybe some agencies and offices, to actually building the government as an organ within organized crime. And that's what AMLO's doing. AMLO is not a corrupted government inside Mexico. He has strategically positioned the Mexican government to help organize crime along the same ways that Hugo Chavez did in Venezuela, Evo Morales in Bolivia, and elsewhere. So for this current Mexican government, China couldn't find a better partner. And the only thing that's holding AMLO back is two things. One, he lost his ability to change the constitution to run for re-election. So there will be an election next year in Mexico and a new president, although he's going to try to put a proxy into power from his same political party. And two, Mexico's a federal system. So the president only has so much control. A lot is in the hands of governors and mayors. And that's why China has done a subnational strategy. And they did this in many countries in Latin America, where they go around the federal government, especially when the federal government's not to their liking, and they start to work with governors and mayors and start to corrupt there. So they're aggressively moving on Mexico, but it's also a country neighbor of the United States. We have a lot of institutional strength in that country. We have a lot of military to military cooperation. But AMLO's been trying to tinker at that and make it weaker by the day.
It's funny you mentioned that strategy because in the United States, both the Trump and Biden administration has been relatively tough on China. You see China doing the same strategy, where they're going after local authorities like governors, like California Governor Gavin Newsom, who just got to meet with Xi Jinping when Biden hasn't been able to do that.
No, I think the subnational strategy is evident. Obviously, I don't think it stops at the border. I think it obviously includes the United States. And it's interesting to me. There's a story reporting that came out recently. I'm sure you guys all saw it about China's purchase of farmlands in the United States, and many governors have been, some governors actually have been enacting state legislation to be able to stop that. But it's interesting because they've done a lot of that in Latin America. They actually purchase land from based on service to loans from country. They did that in Ecuador. They did that in Argentina. They did that in Venezuela. They did that in parts of Brazil and Peru, Bolivia. And I think what the idea there was to then take that territory, that land that they can have acquired, and then invite organized crime to come into those territories. And in the case of, for example, Argentina, one of the northern states where China has some of its most influences in Jujuy, is also a hub now for major cross-border illicit trafficking, and it's grown exponentially. It's correlation, but it's grown exponentially since China's taken over, since China's gone concessions to that territory.
You know what that makes me think about? Especially in California, well, lots of states that have moved to legalize various drugs. What happened was that a lot of the, like, say a marijuana plantation, a lot of those have been taken over by international drug cartels because they had the money to drive out, like, your mom and pop marijuana growers, and if China has influence with these drug cartels, who are also getting this farmland in the U.S., this is another way China is influencing, getting control of U.S. territory and also promoting international crime.
Yeah, well, I think it's just be very clear. I mean, China's not interested in the United States being a powerful and prosperous country. I mean, they're not purchasing land inside the United States to help the productive development of those economies in those states. They're looking at subversive strategies. They're looking at alternative ways to basically penetrate the infrastructure and the territory of these states, and to create elements of subversion and sabotage. I don't think China wants to have a direct confrontation with the United States if they can avoid it. But their plan is to actually, as I mentioned before, is to actually subvert the United States so that we lose our political will to engage in that fight. Because the fight's probably going to happen regardless of what we want. China's developed their whole strategy on being able to change the international order. That is impossible to take place if the United States is still at the head of that international order. So that naturally leads to a confrontation. But they're leveraging all their poker chips so that they can have the most advantageous position during that confrontation. And I think we're heading to that confrontation. I mean, now at the Pentagon is less of a question of when and more a question. I'm sorry, less a question of if and more a question of when this confrontation will take place.